The 12th day of the Cold War with Alexander. He was at his birthday party with a woman from the upper circle. Others joked. Alexander, are you really going to abandon Grace from your family? She's the Cinderella you chased for 6 years. Alexander, hugging the extremely beautiful woman in his arms, gave a sly smile and said, girls from a poor family background like her are always daydreaming. I just wove a beautiful dream for her to let her taste the sweetness of love after all. She's never been loved before. I just like her look of being both inferior and arrogant. It's really interesting. Everyone burst into laughter and drank merrily. I stood outside the door, listening to him talking about me so casually. The birthday gift I bought for him in my hand seemed to be mocking my stupidity. I silently turned around and left. If you can't hold the sand, just let it go. Later, Alexander asked me if I had a heart. I said, I don't. Inside the private room, Alexander and Sophia were cuddling together as if no one else was around. I stood outside the door, unable to describe how I felt at that moment. The days with Alexander were full of on again, off again moments. Every time during the Cold War, he would always wait haughtily for me to go and beg him like a dog, and he, without any scruples, trampled my dignity under his feet. That became more and more excessive, and I became more and more without principles. On the 12th day of the Cold War, he was openly flirting with another woman. It was nothing but that he knew that today was his birthday, and I would surely come, and I would come with a gift to coax him. Someone inside the room joked. Alexander, are you really not going to want Grace from your family anymore? You chased her for 6 years. Alexander, hugging Sophia, took a puff of cigarette and said with a teasing smile, the ordinary Cinderella likes to daydream. I just wove a beautiful dream for her to let her taste the sweetness of love. After all, she's never been loved before. However, it seems that she really thinks she's somebody in my eyes. Everyone burst into laughter and said, then why did you chase her for so long, Alexander? It was just that I wasn't reconciled without sleeping with her. I just like her look of being both inferior and arrogant. It's really interesting. Sophia poked his chest with her finger and said, what's the point of an old maid? Alexander exhaled the smoke and said with a smile, indeed, there's not much point. He's so awkward that it makes me want to let her stay single for the rest of her life. I'm too lazy to bother with her. The dense pain in my heart swept over my nerves suddenly. I felt everything was so dull. When I turned around and left, only numb disappointment remained. In the brightly lit night, I threw the birthday gift I carefully selected for him into the trash can. If you can't hold the sand, just let it go. On the crowded street, many people were coming and going. Who was the one who couldn't get the love they wanted, and who was the one who didn't care about others? I grew up in the midst of my parents' quarrels and insults after they divorced. My father often brought different women home and asked me to call them mom if I refused. He would beat me to death later. My father left me with my grandparents and didn't care about me at all. My grandparents hated my mother, and also hated me. Even my so-called grandfather tried to molest me. I often hid behind the house and cried all night. No one was nice to me, and no one hoped I would be well. I've always been a pessimist when it comes to relationships. I never thought that anyone would really love me. So when Alexander chased me, I didn't even think about it and refused him completely, but he still chased me for a full 6 years, from sophomore year in high school to graduation from university. No matter how coldly I refused him, he would always patiently say, whether you love me or not, I will always love you. I pushed him away again and again to test his sincerity, and he was always by my side and never left. I thought he really loved me. Who doesn't want to be loved? 6 years. How many 6 years can one have in life? I tried to open my heart and accept him, but just 1 week after we got together, he couldn't wait to get me into bed. I thought that if we weren't married, we shouldn't do that kind of thing, so I refused him. But he was still not giving up and always tried to coax me in various ways. After being rejected many times, he lost his patience and began to use cold violence. He often didn't say a word to me for several days. In the 2 years since we got together, the balance of our relationship had quietly reversed. His feelings began to fade, while mine began to deepen. Some people say that those who don't fall in love easily will go crazy once they do. I think I'm probably that kind of person. I began to tolerate Alexander without any bottom line more and flatter him more and more humbly. Alexander became the dominant one in the relationship. Every time I didn't agree to do that kind of thing with him, He would do all kinds of excessive things to anger me. For example, he would leave me behind regardless of the occasion. Whether it was in a heavy rain or a strong wind, for example, he would say vulgar words to me in front of his cronies, making others look at me with disgusting and dirty eyes. For example, he would call me to pick him up in the middle of the night, and when I arrived, he would tell me to get lost. For example, during holidays, he would deliberately send 9 red envelopes of $9.99 each to other girls to anger me. Like now, he found Sophia, someone from the upper circle they mentioned, to humiliate me, the Cinderella. Severely he hurt me without any scruples. He was happy to see me in pain and sad every time I cried. He would gently wipe away my tears, and he would whisper in my ear to admit his mistake. Immediately after that, he would say to me in a hoarse voice, "Will you give it to me? As long as you give it to me, I will always love you." He had been waiting for my final bottom line to collapse. I wasn't without the thought of giving in to him. Sometimes when I was extremely sad, I would think that there would be no one in the world who loved me more than him, so what if I gave in to him? But every time I wanted to take that step, I was afraid that in the end, I would have nothing and leave in a sorry state. Today, I deliberately put on makeup and wore the most beautiful clothes. I overcame all my pessimism and originally planned to give myself completely to him, but he gave me a heavy blow. It turned out that everything was fake. I was so unworthy in his heart. Look at me shedding that useless pride of mine, being completely consumed by inferiority, and prostrating myself utterly at his feet. I'll surely take great delight in that. I suddenly burst out laughing, only to have tears gushing out all of a sudden. My uneventful and insipid life, surprisingly, had someone who would go to such lengths to worm their way into it. Looking back, when I chose to forgive him time and again, it was nothing short of ironic when I said that we couldn't do that without getting married. Alexander never once brought up the topic of marriage. It was truly laughable, yet I was trapped in the pretense of his love and couldn't free myself. I had always been the one who was blinded by being in the thick of it. In this world, even my own biological parents don't love me. How could others possibly love me truly? Fortunately, it's not too late to realize this. My life was already a muddled mess. It's just going back to the starting point. What's so hard to come to terms with? It's just that indescribable sense of gloom still clings to me like a devil. After all, I'm not an unfeeling machine. 8 years. Even if it were a dog suddenly leaving my life would also leave me feeling lost and at a loss for words, right? When passing by a dessert shop, I wiped away my tears. I went in and bought a piece of cake. Then, I went to the neighboring store and bought a cup of milk tea. I've heard that eating sweet things can produce dopamine and make people feel happy. I took a bite of the cake and a sip of the milk tea. The sweetness was transmitted to the brain through the taste nerves. But what flashed through my mind were all the memories of Alexander and me. Those were actually the happiest times for me. Tears splashed onto the back of my hand, and I then realized that I was crying again. It's all a lie. Why did I feel even sadder after eating something sweet? I tried hard to hold back my tears voraciously, probably because I was in such a bad mood that I didn't even notice the person coming towards me. I bumped into him all of a sudden, and the milk tea spilled all over him. I hurriedly apologized, but all the things in my hands dropped to the ground with a clatter. I hurriedly crouched down to pick up the things, but the cake had fallen to the ground and got dirty. It could no longer be eaten, just like my shattered emotions that could no longer be pieced together. The tears I held back were swirling in my eyes. I just felt that my throat was choked almost to the point of suffocation. I could no longer convince myself that it didn't matter after all. I was still sad. I buried my face between my knees and let the tears pour out. "I didn't scold you. Why are you crying?" A man's voice rang out in front of me. I slowly looked up. Through my teary eyes, I saw Maximus. He was Alexander's good brother. His arm was resting on his knee, and the wristwatch on his wrist reflected the fragmented lights of the city. He crouched halfway in front of me, looking at me impassively. "Are you okay?" His words seemed to carry a distant echo, just like in the second year of high school, because my grandfather appeared by my bedside in the middle of the night. I ran out in a disheveled state. Scared when I ran to the crossroads, I fell to the ground, trembling all over. Alexander was also like this, crouching halfway in front of me. "Are you okay?" Time flew back quickly, and the sense of grievance grew even more rampant. Why was everything false? The tears fell even more heavily. Maximus looked at me for a while, and then helped me up from the ground. "It's just a cake and milk tea. I'll pay for them for you." He bent down to pick up the broken cake on the ground and threw it into the trash can. Then, he led me to his car. Wait for me here. He closed the car door and went to the dessert shop not far away. The hustle and bustle of the city, with its bright lights and colors, filtered through the car window, and model light entered the car, but it couldn't illuminate this gloomy compartment. Just like my heart, which was like stagnant water at the moment, and I couldn't find a remedy. Maximus soon came back with cakes and milk teas. Many kinds of cakes, many kinds of milk tea. She stuffed them all into my arms at once. I'll take you home. In the last private room, Alexander kept looking at the door frequently, and his mood was getting more and more irritable. He picked up his phone several times and then threw it away again. He smoked one pack of cigarettes after another and drank one bottle of liquor after another. Everyone was looking forward to what kind of drama Grace would put on, including Alexander. He even posted his location on WeChat moments. However, Grace never pushed the door and entered Alexander. As those cronies were getting a bit impatient waiting, even Alexander himself could hardly sit still. He felt that he was really despicable. He could have any woman's he wanted. He have to be so distracted because of Grace. What on earth was it that made him have to have Grace? At this time, the door of the private room was pushed open. Alexander eagerly looked up when he saw that it was the waiter delivering the wine. He slumped down on the sofa as if deflated. Alexander pushed Sophia, who had been clinging to him all the time, away and lit a cigarette. Sophia wriggled her waist and leaned over, but was pushed away by Alexander with a shove. Get out! Sophia's tears were swirling in her eyes. Can't you hear me telling you to get out? Sophia's tears finally fell, and she stood up and walked away feeling aggrieved. The private room was instantly silent. After a while, someone finally forced Olaf to smooth things over. Alexander, you're still so impatient. Grace is your lapdog. Now what are you afraid of? Everyone laughed. That's right. Alexander still has the hair tie that Grace forced him to wear on his wrist. Even the meals Alexander eats every day have to be cooked by her personally. He has to eat them. Also, Grace knows the passwords of Alexander's WeChat, Alipay, and bank cards. She always logs into his accounts to check on him when she has a chance. Just wait and see. Grace won't be able to hold out tonight. All Alexander crying in the middle of the night. Alexander's fingers gently rubbed the small rubber band on his wrist. And his mood became much more comfortable. The previous few times, Grace was so stimulated by him that she almost gave in to him. He sensed her wavering. So today he dropped the bombshell of Sophia. He thought that maybe tonight, Grace would willingly and completely give herself to him. Thinking of Grace's gentle and delicate appearance, Alexander was a little distracted. Not knowing what she would be like when being bullied by him at will. Would she be in tears like pear blossoms, or remain silent without a word? Or perhaps, Alexander, I can see that you still care a lot about Grace. If nothing else works, just marry her. Once married, won't you be able to do whatever you want? Are you stupid? Does Grace's status match mine, Alexander? Alexander won't marry her recently. Alexander's family has already been arranging a marriage for him. Really? Alexander? Alexander didn't respond all the time. Just when everyone was about to continue talking, he stood up and walked away directly. He couldn't wait any longer. He wanted to get Grace tonight. I was sitting in front of the French window in the living room with no lights on. The city, which was once bustling with bright lights and wine, gradually fell into silence in the dead of night. The cake in the bag was in a mess, and the milk tea was also scattered all over the floor. The person I had fallen in love with so hard was with someone else at this moment. Would he also whisper naughty love words into her ears? Would he also easily make vows of eternal love? In the dim space, I let my emotions surge back. I think my sadness isn't that pathetic. Who wouldn't be sad at all after truly loving someone? At 2:30 in the morning, Alexander's driver parked the car downstairs of Grace's residence. In the dead of night, everything was silent. All the sensory information was infinitely magnified. He tugged at his tie. Feeling a bit thirsty, Alexander got out of the car and went upstairs. However, when he got to the door and entered the password, it was wrong several times. Impatiently, he kicked the door and started ringing the doorbell. When I heard the noise outside the door, I didn't react much. I knew it was Alexander. I thought that if there was no response, he would leave on his own. But my mobile phone started ringing, again and again. Probably having heard the music of the mobile phone inside the house, Alexander started banging on the door. I stared at the name flashing on the screen for a long while, not wanting to disturb the neighbors. I still answered his call. Alexander's voice was hoarse from drinking. Honey, I'm sorry. Let's stop the Cold War, okay? Today is my birthday, and you didn't even come. I've been waiting for you all the time, but it doesn't matter. If you don't come to me, I'll come to you. I can live without anything, but I definitely can't live without you as my wife. I listened to Alexander's coaxing with an indifferent expression and didn't respond. Tomorrow. Let's go get the marriage certificate, okay? I want you to have my children. I really miss you so much. Baby, don't be angry. Open the door for me, okay? When I heard this sentence, I let out a scornful laugh. How could he say those things and then sweet talk to me like this? Alexander, let's break up. The space was silent for a few seconds. Alexander couldn't believe it. What did you say? Maybe because of the huge emotional fluctuations, I had a bit of a headache. I closed my eyes and repeated it again. Alexander, let's break up. I've been so good to you. And you want to break up with me? Grace, do you have a conscience? Thank you for accompanying me for so many years. Let's not contact each other anymore in the future. When I said this sentence, my nose suddenly felt a bit sour. Although Alexander wasn't sincere enough to me, he was the person who had accompanied me the longest and been the nicest to me in this world. It was just a pity that there were too many people in this world who let down such romantic feelings in the end. Things between him and me came to nothing. You also know that I've accompanied you for so many years. Can you bear to abandon me? Is there anyone in this world who loves you more than I do? Baby. There won't be a second person who will wait for you and accompany you as patiently as I do. Don't break up, okay? He could still say these words so smoothly, as if he loved me deeply and no one could replace him. Once upon a time, I also thought so, but now, I just find it ridiculous. Alexander, there's no use talking more. Let's just leave it like this. Do you really want to break up? His voice turned cold. Yes, you can't even be coaxed. Right? I don't need you to coax me, you can go. Alexander was impatient. What the hell do you want? I've done all this, and you're still not satisfied. Grace, do you really think too highly of yourself? Have I, Alexander, been too nice to you? Making you forget who you are? No wonder you were abandoned by your parents, no wonder your grandparents dislike you, no wonder no one loves you. You're really ungrateful. The person who knows you best knows exactly where the knife will hurt the most. Alexander's words were like stabbing my heart. One by one it seemed that in this relationship, I was the one who betrayed first. It seemed that I had done something extremely evil to hurt him. I didn't say anything more and hung up the phone. Alexander was so angry that he banged on the door hard, and then left the community with a cold laugh. Alexander got into the car, but he didn't ask the driver to drive. Instead, he lit a cigarette. He originally thought that after getting Grace tonight, he would break up with her completely anyway. He was a bit tired of her. And he had never really thought about marrying her. If not getting married, he could do any crazy things for her, but if it came to getting married, her status was really not presentable. However, tonight he didn't get his way. She even brought up the breakup with him first. Alexander felt a burning pain in his heart before he had taken a few puffs of the cigarette. He crushed it between his fingers. There were many women around him. As long as he wanted, he could get all kinds of women, but Grace, she just didn't fall for his tricks. She was cold-hearted and hard to be moved. One had to be patient, and take it step by step. Only when she regarded him as a safe person would she accept him at the beginning. It was his sense of conquest that drove him. He just didn't believe that he couldn't win Grace's heart, and this had been going on for 8 years at this moment. Alexander suddenly couldn't tell whether it was his sense of conquest, where he had really fallen in love. He just felt that his anger was hard to dissipate. Why did she reject him? What on earth gave her the right? Alexander threw away the cigarette, took out his mobile phone, and made a call. Make Grace suffer a bit in her company. He thought that maybe during the years with him, Grace had had too many good days. Having forgotten all the hardships she had endured in the past, he intended to make her relive those days, so that she could come to realize that having him by her side was a blessing for her. The next day, I had just arrived at the company when I bumped into Sophia Head, and she was an intern in the company. Yet she wielded considerable power. Everyone said she had connections, But no one knew exactly how powerful her backers were. It was only yesterday that I learned that she and Alexander were from the same social circle. Good morning, Grace. She greeted me enthusiastically as usual, though there was a tinge of contemptuous mockery in her eyes. I didn't deliberately scrutinize her gaze and replied calmly. Good morning. Sophia caught up with me and said, thank you for helping me with my work yesterday. Let me treat you to dinner today. Okay, yesterday. She had pleaded with me to finish the work she hadn't completed. She said she was in a hurry to celebrate her boyfriend's birthday. Seeing how frantic she was, I helped her out. Little did I expect that the person she was going to meet was my boyfriend. I was disinclined to say much to such a person and simply replied, no, thanks. Oh, come on. It's just a meal between friends. Dawn T turned me down. I halted in my tracks and looked at her coldly. No need. I'm not that familiar with you. We've known each other for so long. Can we even be considered friends? Hardly. After saying that, I continued walking forward. Sophia seemed to have been affronted and sneered. What else can you do besides putting on airs of aloofness? Everyone knows that your grandfather had his way with you long ago. What are you feigning for? Alexander thinks you're dirty. He says you're just a Cinderella. Yet you take yourself so seriously. If I were you, I'd be too ashamed to live in this world. Those long ago unpleasant incidents had once made Alexander feel extremely sorry. He was always remorseful that he hadn't shown up in my life earlier. Now, however, they had become the subject of their ridicule. Sadly, I couldn't even refute Sophia's words. I couldn't prove those baseless rumors on my own. Even if I did, no one would believe me. Sophia had connections, was good-looking, and had relationships within the company. Many male colleagues in the company were her sycophants, and female colleagues also liked to fawn over her. Between Sophia and me, it was obvious without even thinking that they would believe Sophia. And I could only let them mock and taunt me. It didn't matter. I had already witnessed enough of the fickleness of human relationships. One more instance didn't make a difference. I said to Sophia casually, you've been snapping at me like a mad dog early in the morning. Did Alexander dump you? Sophia was hit where it hurt, and her face contorted with rage. Who do you think you are? Do you really think you're that important to Alexander? And you have the nerve to say that you won't do that sort of thing without getting married. Alexander would never marry a dirty thing like you. You're just pretending to be pure. In fact, you're already rotten to the core. I didn't retort angrily. Whoever lost their temper first would be the loser. I smiled, and my voice remained nonchalant. Yeah, Alexander loves someone like me instead of you. Ray, really pitiful. Probably you don't know this. Do you? Last night, at around 2 o'clock, Alexander came to me drunk. Do you think he's cheap? He turned down a noble and clean lady like you and came to me instead. A man like him is so cheap. I could give him to you. But you couldn't even hold on to him. You Ray, really useless. Since you can't charm a man, you come to bite me. How embarrassing. If I were you, I wouldn't even have the face to come and provoke me. Although these words made me feel a sense of vindication on the surface, my heart was pierced with pain. I really didn't want to have such an undignified altercation with someone on the street like this, but in the end, others wouldn't let me off. Sophia was so angry that her face turned red and her lips were trembling. I turned around and left without wasting another word. I knew Sophia wouldn't let it go, however. I didn't expect the storm to come so soon. As soon as I entered the company, everyone looked at me with eyes full of curiosity and mockery. I sat down and opened my computer. New emails arrived simultaneously in both my company mailbox and personal mailbox. The new email box was full of pictures of me. Those pictures were no less nauseating than those in Japanese porn movies, and the faces in the pictures were my grandfather and me. These were pictures fabricated using AI face swapping, and the sender was Sophia. The world doesn't care whether these pictures are real or fake. They're only willing to believe that it was my sordid past. How could a person be so perfect when they're young, beautiful, educated, then capable? Oh, so her past was so dirty only in this way could it fill the envy and discontent in their hearts. Then they would hypocritically say, she's so pitiful, I'd rather be ugly and ordinary. All I could do seemed to be to remain silent. But was silence really useful? I opened my personal mailbox. The file inside made me freeze for a moment. After a long while, I replied to that email. Thank you. The reply came instantly. You're welcome. Time seemed to overlap again. It was as if that year when I woke up in the hospital and saw Alexander by my bedside at that moment, thousands of words were condensed into just one sentence. Thank you. He also said, "You're welcome." My heart, which had gradually become numb, suddenly ached. All the past had already become a thing of the past, yet I would still feel a dull pain in my heart just because someone was a little bit like him. In the instant when my eyes became blurry, I raised my head to hold back my tears. Tears are the trophies of others, and I don't want to surrender. I opened my computer and started typing on the keyboard. Those people probably also thought that I would only remain silent, so they didn't even bother to lower their voices when discussing. She usually doesn't like to talk and doesn't interact with people. Is it because she's afraid that people will find out about her past? Afraid that people will find out. Just because she's afraid doesn't mean people won't know. I have a classmate who was her high school classmate. I heard that her family relationships were quite messy, especially between her and her grandfather. She used to hang out with the school delinquents. All other private life was a mess. She looks so innocent. Who would have thought she was so dirty? I heard that her boyfriend is handsome and rich. Why did he fall for her? He was deceived by her innocent appearance. A woman who has been used by others long ago. Why should she deserve an excellent man? Is she worthy? The complexity and diversity of human nature were vividly manifested at this moment. When you plummet to the bottom of the abyss, everyone will only stand on the high platform to pass judgment on you. They conceal the ladder that could rescue you and watch inferiorly as you crawl in the depths when you can no longer climb out of the abyss. They can then condemn you, curse you, and mock you with a clear conscience. No one cares about the reason why you can't get up. Since no one cares about the truth or falsehood, why should I bother to prove myself? With a click of the mouse, the final step is completed. A few dozen seconds later, the entire office is in an uproar. The woman in this email isn't Grace, it's Sophia. How is that possible? I just saw Grace clearly. Look, Sophia is just the daughter of the Johnson family's nanny. And look at these photos. They're Sophia's medical records from the obstetrics and gynecology department. Sophia has had abortions many times in the obstetrics and gynecology department. My goodness, there are even records of Sophia checking into hotels with different men? Is she that wild? In an instant, I am forgotten by the whole world. Everyone's attention has shifted to Sophia. Those who are just speaking up for Sophia have now become her judges. No one cares about the truth or falsehood. Nor do they care about Sophia's mental state. I don't need to prove myself. I just need to let someone else take my place and become the focus. Sophia rushed towards me, her eyes red and looking deranged, and was about to strike me with her raised hand. I stood up, abruptly grabbed her wrist, and flung her away forcefully. I grew up in the mire since childhood. I'm not a delicate young lady. I have considerable strength. With this throw, I sent Sophia flying right onto the workstation opposite. By sheer coincidence, the person at the opposite workstation was sending WeChat messages to his cronies. In the chat box were Sophia's indecent photos in the group chat. There were all kinds of vulgar remarks about her figure, and such. Sophia immediately flew into a rage. She snatched the person's phone and smashed it straight away, and then slapped that person. Finally, she even tried to gouge out that person's eyes. I'll make you look. I'll make you look. I'll make you look. You fat pig. Do you even deserve to look at me? That man happened to be no pushover either. He got up, picked up a chair, and hurled it at Sophia. Bitch, you think you're something? You're really putting on an act now? If it weren't for your family begging my dad with a shameless face, with your degree from that lousy university, could you have gotten into my family's company? Just because others praised you a few times, you really think you're somebody? Do you think you're any nobler than Grace? With your family background, you're not even worth looking at in our circle. You're even more of a clown than Grace. At least Grace is much more well-behaved than you. You've been played with so much yourself. And now you're trying to smear others? I don't deserve to look at your photos. I'm going to look at them today no matter what. The man directly started to rip Sophia's clothes off. There were many people around, but not a single one stepped forward to break up the fight. Sophia fell from being a noble princess into the mire, looking utterly wretched. I walked away with indifference and numbness. This dog-eat-dog farce was extremely boring. I have to look for a new job again. It's rather annoying. But no matter how annoying it is, it won't be more annoying than staying here. When I drove away, it was already past the morning rush hour. I wasn't in a hurry to go home. I drove my car, wandering aimlessly in the empty city. Since I started working, I've hardly had a moment to rest today. However, I was completely free and relaxed. Before I knew it, the car had driven to another city. This is the past that I hated, and the place that I had been desperately trying to escape from it was someone else's hometown but my hell. When I came to my senses, I saw the gate of the high school I once attended. The iconic all-sycamore tree was so lush the leaves were swaying in the hot wind of midsummer. The stationery stores and snack bars on both sides of the street were still there. Students were walking into the school in groups of 3 or 5. Wearing their school uniforms. It was another graduation season. Whose youth is without regrets? Whose youth is full of regrets? The sound of distant music came to my ears. Allow me to settle like dust. Bury the past with silence covered in wind and rain. I came from the sea, and only then did I retreat to this desert. As if in an instant, there was a huge suction force that pulled me back to the distant past. The memories about Alexander once again had an opening. My brain started to release various fragments about him. When I was in primary school, my parents got divorced. My grandparents hated me to the core, but for the sake of face, I still took care of me occasionally. Grandpa would show some kindness to me, holding my hand and asking me to be obedient. At that time, I couldn't understand his lewd eyes. I just wanted to please Grandpa, hoping that he would like me. However, the actions of Grandpa became more and more inappropriate. He often grabbed my hand and rubbed it back and forth. I didn't like that feeling and started to subconsciously avoid Grandpa. When I was in high school, I didn't hesitate to choose to live on campus. I would avoid going home whenever possible at that time. How I wished I could grow up quickly and escape from that filth. I thought that after enduring the last 3 years, my life would step into a new chapter, but those 3 years were not easy to endure. Grandpa would come to pick me up from school from time to time. Nosy people started to talk about my family affairs. Gossip spread all over the campus. Everyone knew that my parents were divorced. Everyone said that I was Grandpa's plaything. Some people even joked about how many abortions I had. Gradually, I became someone that everyone could bully. What I wore, what I ate, and even my hairstyle would all become the butt of others' jokes. The little hooligans in the class asked me in front of the whole class how much I charged per time and that he wanted to pay by the month. When the class was arranging seats, my desk mate would deliberately change seats with the little hooligan to let the little hooligan sit next to me. When the monitor was arranging duty, he would deliberately put me in the same group as the little hooligan. The teacher turned a blind eye and couldn't be bothered to care about me. That was the darkest time in my life. I even thought about dying. I had thought about gritting my teeth and persevering, but every time I pulled myself together, those filthy aspects of human nature would shatter my will again. And Alexander showed up when I was lingering on the verge of death. That day, my father forced me to go home with him. He was my biological father when he dragged me into the car by force. No one around dared to lend me a hand except those who were just watching the fun. My father brought a woman home again just like before. He asked me to call her mom. I refused to do it no matter what. My father was so angry that he picked up a whip and was about to hit me. The woman he brought back shielded me in her arms, and the whip landed on her instead. Her voice was so gentle as she comforted me, telling me not to be afraid. Then she snatched the whip from my father's hands. He handed something in her hand to me and said gently, "Grace, don't be afraid, Auntie won't let him hit you." There were cakes and milk tea in that bag. At that time, I had never eaten cakes or drunk milk tea before. When the wonderful smell wafted into my nostrils, my tears immediately fell down. No one had ever spoken to me so gently before. How nice it would be if I had a mother to. She wiped away my tears for me, inserted a straw into the cup of yang lu, a kind of drink, and brought it to my lips. Looking at me gently, she said, "It's really delicious. Have a taste." Her eyes were so kind, as if she really loved me because of someone else. Finally, I gave in and took a sip of the milk tea. I thought that even if she was a stepmother, as long as she could take me away, it would be 10,000 times better than my current life. However, in the evening, I felt weak all over. The moment I woke up from a nightmare. There was lightning and thunder outside. The lewd and hideous face of my grandfather was especially terrifying in the flickering light, and shadow. Only then did I realize that there was something wrong with that cup of milk tea. My eyes started to burn. I was really crazy to actually believe that woman would be kind to me. What kind of good person could fall for my father? Fortunately, I had only taken one sip. At the moment when my grandfather pounced on me, I picked up the pepper spray that was placed aside and sprayed it directly into his eyes. When he exclaimed and covered his eyes, I grabbed the thermos flask on the side and poured all the scalding hot water inside onto his lower body. His howling like a pig being slaughtered rang out in the room. My grandmother came running when she heard the noise. I pushed her aside and ran out. While running away, my emotions were heightened to the extreme, and my limbs started to tremble uncontrollably. I was afraid that someone would suddenly chase after me from behind, and also afraid that someone would suddenly block my way in front. I don't know how long I ran. All I remember is that at a crossroads, I fell to the ground. My face hit the ground hard. My head was buzzing, and I couldn't get up for a long time. At this moment, a pair of shoes appeared in front of my eyes, and my heart jumped into my throat. I wanted to get up, but I just couldn't. Alexander crouched in front of me, half squatting, looking at me with my disheveled clothes in confusion and asking, "Are you okay?" It wasn't my grandfather, nor my father. At that moment, it was like a drowning person suddenly seeing a life-saving log. All my emotions burst out at that moment. I couldn't say a word, and just kept crying. Alexander helped me up, put his coat on me, and then took me to the hospital. He comforted me softly, took out his student ID and ID card to show me, asking me not to be so nervous and not to be afraid. At that time, he was like a warm sun to me. The noisy reality around pulled back my consciousness. The past quickly faded away in my mind. The car stopped steadily in the parking space. I lay exhausted on the steering wheel at this moment. My phone beeped with a notification sound. It was a message in the alumni group that the usually quiet group had an astonishing 99 messages today. I casually clicked on it and saw that Alexander was sending out red envelopes. But someone me. Grace, are you and Alexander getting married? Congratulations. Lovers finally get together. Be happy. There were also people teasing. I really didn't expect Alexander to be so persistent. Indeed. He looks like a playboy, but he's so devoted. Grace. Say something, Alexander. She's throwing a tantrum at me, ignoring me, and wants to break up with me. Then why don't you go and coax her, Alexander? Teach me how to coax her. I can't do it well. Aren't you the king of bootlickers? Why are you asking us? Alexander me. Honey, don't be angry with me anymore, okay? Don't leave me. If only everything could go back to the way it was before. If only life had what ifs, but unfortunately, by now, everything has long lost its original appearance. We can't go back to the past either. I calmly and inferiorly typed a line. I've already broken up with Alexander. After that, I left the alumni group and I also withdrew from all the related group chats. Almost immediately after I left the group, Alexander's call came in. I hung up and then blocked all of Alexander's contact information. The world was finally quiet. I glanced sideways at the outside world. Numb and indifferent, I stayed in the parking space at the school entrance for the whole day when the lights were just coming on. I went to an old restaurant and ordered a bowl of rice noodles. The steam was thick, making my eyes moist having gone through such a profound journey. I still haven't gotten used to being alone. Is he that important? With a clear and gentle male voice, Maximus sat down opposite me. The moment I looked up, a tear fell into the bowl. I turned my face away a bit awkwardly. What are you doing here? Maximus smiled and said, Is Alexander very important to you? I was slightly stunned. I nodded and then shook my head. How could he not be important? But no matter how important he was, I had to let him go. Was he good to you? He asked again. I thought for a moment and said, Not bad, at least from my perspective. He was the nicest person to me. Maximus, do you know the quickest way to forget someone? I poked at the rice noodles in the bowl and asked. What? Start a new relationship. I don't want to be in a relationship anymore. It's too tiring. Then get married. Who would marry me? I would. I was stunned for a moment and then looked up at Maximus. He was looking at me with a serious expression. It took me a while to realize what he had said. We don't know each other well, Maximus. Maximus took a sip of water and said with a laugh. You ate the cake I bought, drank the milk tea I bought, and used the email I sent you. Now you're telling me we don't know each other well. No wonder Alexander said you were cold-hearted. Only then did I remember that the email about Sophia was sent by Maximus. I felt a bit embarrassed and said, "Thank you for helping me, Maximus." As expected of a computer expert, you did a great job replacing the email along the original path. Have you been paying attention to Sophia for a long time? She had been around Alexander for a long time already, but you just didn't know it. I nodded my head and started eating the rice noodles. Although I was feeling unhappy in my heart, I also understood that what could be taken away from me didn't belong to me. Even if it wasn't Sophia, it would be some other woman. It was just a matter of time. As I was eating the rice noodles, I casually asked him, "Don't tell me you're doing all this for me." Maximus didn't dodge my gaze and looked straight into my eyes. "If I say yes, would you believe me?" I didn't blink. "No." Maximus laughed and took out a file from the side and handed it to me. "Are these conditions enough for you to marry me?" I didn't take the file. I refused directly. Marriage isn't a must-have option in my life, and I don't like you either. Maximus put the file into my hand. "If you marry me, if I file for divorce, I'll leave the house empty-handed. If you file for divorce, 50 of my personal property will go to you. No one will dare to bully you anymore. You can always take advantage of me and hold up an umbrella for yourself. If marriage isn't a must-have option for you, then consider it as an additional option, and let me be one of the options. Grace, you'll only gain and never lose." I listlessly flipped through the prenuptial agreement in my hand. "Maximus, do you think I'm a fool? Good things that fall from the sky won't land on me. You're acting like this, which makes me think you're a swindler." I closed the file and threw it back to Maximus. "I'm not interested in marrying you." After saying that, I started to show him the door. "You can go now." But Maximus didn't move. "You've made Sophia suffer so much. She won't let it go like this. And Alexander won't let you live a peaceful life either." I frowned. In the capital city, I had finally managed to get a foothold. I had just bought my house not long ago, and I still had a mortgage. I couldn't be like those rich people who could sell their houses and leave whenever they wanted. I didn't have the capital to be and start over. Those photos of Sophia were already known to everyone. She wouldn't take revenge on others. She would only take revenge on me. Even if I called the police and had her detained for a day, it couldn't detain her for a lifetime. I would be trapped in a vicious cycle. And there was Alexander. He could dump me when he got tired of me. But I couldn't dump him. He would use every means to continue to disgust me. As long as Alexander and Sophia were alive, I wouldn't have a good life. Marrying Maximus seemed to be a really good choice, but this kind of choice made me feel uncomfortable. Maximus continued. "Even if you divorce me in the future, I'll still have someone protect you for a lifetime." He raised his hand and gently stroked my cheek. His thumb rubbed against my lips. "The black and white words drafted by the lawyer have legal effect. Even if it's a swindling act, I only want to deceive your heart." I grabbed his hand. "Don't do this." He held my hand back. "Don't do what, Maximus? I'm here. I don't have a heart anymore. So what are you still afraid of?" Yeah, I didn't have a heart anymore. What was I still afraid of? Instead of living in the torture of those two people, it was better to live in the love weaved by Maximus. Even if it was fake, I could have a moment of peace. When the marriage certificate landed in my hand, I felt a bit dazed. The wind of midsummer shuttled through the branches and leaves of the plane trees. The sunlight fell on the red certificate, as if it was the shackles of fate. I didn't know what the future outcome would be. I just wanted to seek the peace of this moment. Maximus took my hand and walked slowly on the sparsely populated street in the afternoon. It was like the way Alexander led me out of the hospital and sent me back to school that year's low and unreal. At this moment, my memories swayed back and forth. There was a beam of light that shuttled from the distant past and hit my heart. Then the pictures of my memories turned into dull black and white. No one was shining in my memories anymore. There was no story in my youth anymore. Suddenly, my nose felt a bit sour. I didn't know what I was sad about. It was just that at this moment, It was hard to let go of the past at this time. Maximus' phone rang. It was a call from the company. He picked it up and hung up after saying a few words. There's an emergency at the company. I need to go back for a while. I nodded. Go ahead and get busy. I'll leave first. Maximus looked at me for a long while and then suddenly kissed me passionately. After a while, he let me go and pressed his forehead against mine. So you really want me to go? I lowered my eyes. Aren't you busy? Come with me. No. He chuckled hoarsely. Then go back and wait for me obediently tonight. I'll start my job with the marriage certificate. I dodged his breath and felt a bit at a loss. Since the day Grace said goodbye in the alumni group and blocked Alexander, Alexander had unilaterally started a cold war with Grace. He knew Grace. After 8 years of companionship, he had already blended into her blood. She definitely couldn't let him go. Alexander completely cut off contact with Grace this time. He disappeared completely. He thought that only when Grace realized that she had truly lost him would she understand his importance. But 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months passed. She didn't show any sign. He became more and more irritable, and his temper got worse and worse. Alexander couldn't think about Grace. The more he thought about her, the more he felt like he was going to go crazy. It took him 6 years to get into her heart and make her his girlfriend. She didn't let him touch her, so he endured it for 2 years. Once he had torn off all her clothes, and was almost about to get her when she cried at that time. If he had just rushed in regardless, she would have completely belonged to him. But seeing her tears, he felt extremely sorry for her. At that moment, he thought he was really a jerk. For the first time, he didn't eat the meat that was already on the verge of being devoured. He dressed her up and stupidly held her in his arms, watching Princess Returning Pearl all night. His cronies laughed at him about this for the whole year, although he always made her angry. He truly loved her. How could she break his heart like this? When the car stopped downstairs at Grace's place, the city had just been tinted with the colors of night. Alexander restrained his emotions and opened the door to get out of the car at this moment. He wanted to have her, even if it meant marrying her. His hurried footsteps stopped in front of Grace's door when he raised his hand to knock on the door. He paused again. It was as if he had gone back to the time when he first started chasing her. So cautious and at a loss no matter how she treated him. He would shamelessly fawn on her. I didn't move into the so-called wedding house bought by Maximus. However, Maximus would always follow me home every time. During these 2 months, he would get up early every day to make breakfast for me. In the evenings, as long as he didn't work overtime, he would drag me to the supermarket to buy groceries and then come back to cook occasionally. When he was busy with work, he would work overtime at home. When I was cooking in the kitchen, I could turn around and see his profile as he was working seriously in the living room. My concept of home, which used to be rather abstract, had become concrete during these 2 months. He respected me very much. Although he had always been saying that he wanted to get a marriage license first, he hadn't really touched me during these 2 months. He took me to the hospital, and it was only then that I realized that my fear of that matter had nothing to do with being married or not. It was because of the psychological shadow left from my youth that I had psychological problems. He was even more concerned about what the doctor said than I was. He would always patiently and gently guide me even when he was on the verge of losing control and going crazy. As long as I showed a little bit of rejection, he would stop immediately. I often felt that he loved me very much, but I didn't know what he loved about me. Every time he looked at me, his gaze made my heart palpitate so much that I didn't dare to look him in the eye. He was like a wild beast that had been starving for a long time whenever there was a chance. He would devour me. Today was no different. He couldn't wait to start kissing me in the elevator. He was holding the groceries in one hand and pressing the back of my head with the other, kissing me wildly and fiercely. The elevator door opened with a ding. He was still kissing me. As he walked out, the rustling sound of the supermarket plastic bags falling to the ground, the unsteady breathing sounds, and the disorderly footsteps all mixed together, forming a scene that was almost too much to look at directly. I didn't even notice when Alexander approached. It wasn't until the smell of cigarette smoke wafted into my nostrils and Alexander's voice rang out. Grace. I was startled and wanted to push Maximus away, but Maximus pressed my head against his chest. The lust in his eyes hadn't dissipated yet. And he looked at Alexander casually. Alexander, anger was instantly ignited. Perhaps he was so angry that his voice was laced with infinite disappointment and pain. Grace. When I was with you, you would always avoid my kisses. Now you can't wait like this in the elevator. 8 years. Not 8 days. What on earth am I? Alexander, to you in your heart? Is your heart made of stone? Do you think I won't be hurt, Grace? He still doesn't think he's wrong. Perhaps, after all, I can never catch his eye or be worthy of being with him in public, so I should be grateful for everything he has done to me, even the hurt, because for someone like me, getting his attention is already a blessing. My head was buried in Maximus' arms and didn't move. I just said in a calm voice, Alexander, there's no point in saying more. Let's just call it quits. Alexander's emotions finally broke down. He tried to pull me away, but was pushed aside by Maximus with a swing of his hand. Alexander and saw Maximus' face clearly. He was almost trembling as he pointed at Maximus. It's you. Alexander stood up, raised his fist and swung it at Maximus. To think that I regarded you as a brother, and you actually slept with my woman. Maximus got Alexander's fist and threw him to one side. He said in a nonchalant tone. She's timid, don't scare her, let us find a place and I'll fight you. Alexander gritted his back teeth. Fine. You've got guts. Maximus pulled me out of his arms, bent down to pick up the bag of groceries on the ground, opened the door, and kissed my forehead. Wait for me at home. He pushed me into the house and then closed the door. At the moment the door closed, I saw Alexander's bloodshot eyes. It seemed that he loved me deeply. Maybe he did love me. After all, no one would accompany someone for 8 years for no reason, but up to now, how much of his love for me still remains? It's just that the toy he was determined to have has been snatched away by someone else. He asks, just not willing to accept it. In the suburbs, in the open wilderness. As soon as they got out of the car, Alexander's fist flew towards Maximus. Were you even human? You slept with your own younger brother's woman? Alexander was completely out of his mind, punching fast and furiously. Maximus couldn't dodge in time and took quite a few hits. When Alexander got tired, Maximus started to fight back vigorously. Whose younger brother are you? Your mother, who got into the family by being a mistress, doesn't even deserve to be mentioned in the same breath as my mother. Also, was she really your woman, huh? No wonder your mother likes being a mistress. The feeling of getting into the family by being a mistress must be really good. Your 8 years of companionship aren't even worth a piece of candy I gave her during her low point. The woman you couldn't get in 8 years, I got in just 2 months. And you, Alexander, have already been forgotten by her completely. She even thinks that you didn't have a single ounce of sincerity towards her in those 8 years. Alexander was so angry that his veins were bulging. Shut up. The two of them were about the same height and build, and neither could gain an obvious advantage in the fight soon. Both of them were bleeding. However, Maximus was still riding high. Only a chill could be seen in the depths of his eyes. Alexander, you've truly inherited 100% of your mother's slutty ways. When I found out that you hadn't won Grace over in 8 years, I knew you were serious. But you don't even realize your own seriousness, so you'll only end up being a joke. Just like how your mother made my mother a laughingstock back then. Alexander's face turned ashen, and he was rendered speechless. He wished he could tear Maximus to pieces. He gnashed his teeth, striking with all his might each time. I thought I'd been good to you, Maximus. Unexpectedly, you're such a despicable scoundrel. What did Grace do wrong? Why are you using her like this? Don't you know you'll ruin her? When Maximus counterattacked, he simply laughed. When you hurt her, did you ever think you'd ruin her? The betrayal you're experiencing now is the same as the betrayal she suffered from you and Sophia. Do you think she'll forgive you? She won't want you anymore, Alexander. Alexander growled lowly and punched Maximus in the face. With this blow, he used all his strength. After hitting him, Alexander staggered to his knees on the ground in despair, looking hideous. Maximus, you're such a brute. Maximus raised his hand to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. Compared to your mother, I'm still not on the same level. With that, Maximus turned and left. When he reached the car, he stopped again with his back to Alexander. He said, Grace is with you because she thinks you truly love her, not because she loves you. So, whoever loves her, she'll go with. You, Alexander, aren't that important to her. Max Sinozanal urged me to wait for him. I didn't deliberately wait for him. I went to bed early. I just woke up from time to time. When I woke up again, it was because I was woken up by the ringing of my mobile phone. The incoming call was from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering it. As soon as the call was connected, Alexander's maniacal laughter came from the other end. You don't need to wait for Maximus anymore. I've beaten him to death. I furrowed my brows and didn't say anything. Alexander continued, do you know who Maximus is? He's my half-brother. Alexander let out a hideous laugh. You think he's with you because he loves you? He's doing it to get revenge on my mother. To get revenge on me. He doesn't love you at all. Grace, besides me, who will love you? Come back to me. Only I truly love you. There was too much information. I couldn't react for a moment. Maximus was Alexander's half-brother? So, my heart suddenly ached dully. The pain was faint, but it reverberated through my nerves. All of a sudden, everything made sense and became clear. I felt a sense of relief. This was in line with my life. How could someone love me for no reason? Probably because I'd never really believed it, so at this moment, I wasn't that sad. I just replied to Alexander with indifference and sarcasm. And then, will you marry me? Alexander, Maximus won't marry you either. Whoever I like, he'll compete with me for them until it's a fight to the death between him and me. The use of the word either was quite subtle. He finally blurted out his true feelings at this moment when he'd lost his sanity. He wouldn't marry me, and he'd never even thought about marrying me. I let out a faint laugh. However, Maximus has already married me. Silence fell on the other end after a long while. He finally spoke. Grace, do you have a heart? I calmly replied. I don't. With that, I hung up the phone. As soon as I hung up, an email arrived in my inbox. It was a recording sent by Alexander. I casually clicked on it. It was the words spoken by Maximus on Alexander during their fight. In the quiet space, each and every word of Maximus was so clear. Those words kept echoing in my ears, deafening while loud. So much so that I didn't even notice when Maximus arrived. It wasn't until he sat in front of me and raised his hand to wipe away the tears that had somehow fallen on my face that I realized his presence. I turned my face away, avoiding his touch. Maximus. Before I could finish my sentence, he cupped my face and kissed me deeply. His face was bruised and battered. Having been hit quite badly, it didn't look good, but it added a touch of wildness to him. He kissed with great intensity. After a long time, he finally rested his forehead against mine and looked into my eyes. Alexander's mother was my mother's patient because her condition was difficult to treat and her family had no money. My mother took good care of her. To support my mother, my father provided a public welfare fund for the hospital to treat that woman for free. But that woman took advantage of the pretext of being grateful to seduce my father. As a result, the relationship between my mother and father broke down. Repaying kindness with ingratitude and being betrayed by her lover plunged my mother into depression, and that woman would still come to provoke my mother from time to time, causing my mother to die of depression. Unable to rest even in death. Maximus' eyes were red at the corners, and tears welled up in them. Grace, I admit that when I was with you, there was an element of getting revenge on Alexander. My feelings for you weren't sincere or pure enough. But I also truly wanted to be with you, and depend on each other. Alexander isn't suitable for you. If you choose to divorce me, I'll respect your choice. I looked at the man in front of me. He was in such pain and distress. As if he was going to shatter the next second, he was like another me in this broken life, constantly healing himself. I raised my hand to gently wipe away the tears from the corners of his eyes. Maximus, is there anyone you love but can't have? He held my hand and kissed it on the lips. No. I lowered my eyes, neither happy nor sad. After a long while, I gently held his hand and said, Maximus, let's depend on each other. At this moment, it seemed that my heart had finally landed completely in the earthly fireworks. His impurity and imperfection made everything seem real. Maximus lifted my chin and said, "Grace. Once you say it, you can't go back on your word." I smiled and said, "Not going back on my word now doesn't mean I won't in the future." Before I could finish speaking, he kissed me. This time, he showed no mercy and didn't stop. His voice drifted up and down beside my ear, saying, "Today, no matter how much you cry, I'm going to start my job with a license. You're injured. This little injury can be regarded as adding to the fun. Maximus. Call me hubby." The early autumn wind blew in through the window, stirring up the moonlight on the floor. In my life, there was someone I could depend on. I didn't know how far I could go with him in the future, but I still wanted to walk side by side with him in this mortal world. In my dreams, there were flowers all the way. In reality, there was broken inches everywhere. But he was truly by my side. Just keep walking like this, walk until we can no longer look back on the past, walked until the soul can't heal itself. Extra Story 1. Alexander didn't believe at first that Grace and Maximus had gotten married. It wasn't until Grace shoved the marriage certificate in front of him. He stared at the marriage certificate in Grace's hand. Motionless at that moment, his mind went blank. He hadn't expected that Maximus would actually marry Grace. Maximus had such great ambitions. He not only wanted to destroy him, Alexander, but also the entire Smith family. How could he possibly choose to marry Grace? And Grace, staying by Maximus's side so contentedly, it was as if those 8 years between him and her had never left a trace of longing in her heart. The way she looked at him was so cold and heartless, but he still had the nerve to ask her. "Maximus said you never loved me, is it true?" Grace's gaze towards him was like tasteless boiled water. She calmly asked him in return, "Alexander, can't you feel whether I loved you or not? Why bother asking?" At that moment, looking at the small rubber band on his wrist, his eyes suddenly felt hot. He suddenly burst out laughing. Grace knew the passwords of his WeChat, Alipay, and bank card accounts. She would check them whenever she had nothing to do to see if he was flirting with other women. Whenever she was free, she would cook for him and send the food to his office when she saw other women around him. She would be so angry that she would cry. How could she have no love for him at all? It was he who had destroyed her love bit by bit, letting the hope in her eyes burn to ashes. This realization made Alexander's heart ache unbearably. He had always thought that he was the kind of person who could pass through a sea of flowers without getting attached to a single leaf. The blade of emotion had never been able to hurt him, but at this moment, the heart-nicking pain almost made him unable to breathe. He walked dejectedly on the deserted street. It was another late autumn when the cold wind blew. The leaves fell all over the ground. The music on the street spread throughout the streets and alleys along with the speakers. "The heart that once hoped to grow old with you is now useless," he said. "Don't bring trouble upon yourself and create your own sadness. Anyone can completely forget anyone else only after loving. Do you know the weight of love? And only after getting drunk do you understand the strength of wine." And after the relationship ended, he finally understood what he had lost in a person's life. There is only one time for sincere and pure love. Alexander had given it to Grace. And Grace had also given it to him, but they didn't reach the end. Every time in the dead of night, he would be consumed by regret. If he had married her earlier, if he hadn't done that series of stupid things, if he had known earlier that he had fallen in love, would Maximus never have had the chance to take advantage of the situation? But there are no ifs in the world. He could only cycle endlessly between resignation and regret in this mortal world, drifting along with the current and spending his life like this. Extra Story 2. In the days that followed, as Maximus had said, no one came to bother me anymore. I rarely saw Alexander again. I heard that he and Maximus were locked in a fierce battle in the business world. Finally, his company was on the verge of going bankrupt. Sophia and that troublesome man were biting each other. That man had his eye on Sophia and used all kinds of means to disgust her. Sophia didn't have a single peaceful day, let alone coming to trouble me. By now, my life had settled down. Every morning when I woke up, seeing the morning sun, hearing the clear chirping of birds, and the bustling sounds of people, I would suddenly feel that the world was actually quite beautiful. As for Maximus, he would still take me to the supermarket to buy groceries and then come back to cook together. No matter how late it was, as long as he wasn't on a business trip, he would come home. There would be no other women around him because he hated third parties. Actually, whether his love was pure or not, whether his heart was sincere, or not, it didn't matter that much anymore. Being able to walk steadily through life with grace for me, that was the best life.